All right. Hello, everybody. Salam alaikum. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and look at philosophy from the perspective of ethics. And I realize that the word philosophy can be used in different ways, as the speaker before me highlighted. But here, what I mean specifically is falsafa, as it's inherited from the tradition of ancient philosophy, particularly Aristotle. So I'm going to start by first introducing Adud ad-Din al-Iji, and I've written a paper on this. So I'm going to read from my paper first for the first 10 minutes or so, and then I will go over the actual contents of the text itself. Adud ad-Din al-Iji was born in the town of Ij near Shiraz around 680-1281. His father was a respected jurist, Qadi, who came from a family that traced its lineage back to the second Muslim caliph, Abu Bakr. Al-Iji was a well-known Ash'ari and Shafi'i scholar who studied with many of the prominent figures of his time. Although he wrote in a range of fields, which include Arabic grammar, philosophy, Islamic law, and theology, he is arguably most renowned for his contributions to philosophy and theology. One of the distinctions of al-Iji's scholarship is in his work of verification or tahqiq. Verification was a movement that developed among Kalam scholars who followed Fakhruddin al-Razi's model of revisiting older texts on theology and reassessing their theological positions in light of the methods of philosophy and reason. Following Fakhruddin al-Razi's school of late Ash'arism, Al-Iji's scholarship on the Kalam tradition laid the groundwork for various commentaries that would be structured around his outline of Islamic philosophical theology. His students, Sayyid Sharif al-Jurjani and Sa'd-ad-Din al-Taftazani, were among the most well-known scholars of theology during the post-classical period, or the Muta'akhirin, of Ash'ari Kalam that was prevalent from al-Razi's time through the Ottoman era. Their Kalam texts and commentaries were studied and discussed in learned circles throughout the Ottoman lands from which Tashköprüzade's work arose. Al-Iji's treatise on ethics, known as Al-Akhlaq al-Adudiyya, is an understudied work in the academy despite the prominence it achieved through the many lengthy commentaries that were written on it by key classical thinkers. In recent years, a number of Turkish academics have produced valuable studies and critical editions of manuscripts related to the Akhlaq al-Adudiyya to address the lacuna in studies of this aspect of Islamic ethics, thus making these Turkish secondary sources indispensable to our study of al-Iji's ethics. While it may not be uncommon to overlook al-Iji's ethical treatise because it restates much of what is found in Nasiruddin al-Tusi's Nasirian ethics in an abridged format, Mustaqim Araji argues that it is in fact this abridged presentation that is one of the most original aspects of al-Akhlaq al-Adudiyya. The nature of the madrasa system of education that developed in the Ottoman period, as well as the mobile schools, Madrasat al-Sayyar, that al-Iji was a teacher in during the Ilkhanid era, made abridged forms of various key topics that can be easily carried as texts, memorized, and discussed among teachers and students, essential to standardizing education at this time. These abridged texts were also intentionally brief in their presentation to ensure proper student and teacher contact in the process of learning, since they could not easily be understood without extensive teacher commentaries. This was intended to facilitate the objective of education becoming a spiritually formative process for students of Islamic knowledge. Al-Akhlaq al-Adudiyya was such a text that allowed for lengthy commentaries to be composed by a range of scholars. The Nasirian ethics upon which Al-Akhlaq al-Adudiyya is derived was heavily influenced by the ethics of Miskawayh, whose work in turn incorporated elements of the Nicomachean ethics of Aristotle. The discussions regarding the various virtues and their extreme forms of excess or deficiency is one of the most obvious influences of the Nicomachean ethics. As Islamic philosophical ethics evolved over the centuries, Muslim scholars restructured, omitted, and made countless additions to various aspects of ancient philosophy they inherited, which included ethical philosophy. This study examines here Tashkubrezade's commentary on the Akhlaq al-Adudiyya. Now let's look at quickly who is Tashkubrizadeh. Tashkubrizadeh Ahmed Efendi was born in Bursa in 900 or 1495 to a family of scholars. His father was a scholar, Muslihuddin Mustafa Efendi, who served as a preceptor for Sultan Selim I. Tashkubrizadeh's access to the leading scholars in the Ottoman era was significant to his formation as a scholar of Islamic sciences. His autobiography in the Miftah as-Saada, The Key to Happiness, indicates that he taught at various renowned Ottoman madrasas of his time. He published extensively in the fields of philosophical theology, kalam, philosophy, and Sufism. His most well-known contributions are the Shaqa'iq al-Nu'maniyya fi Ulama Dawlat al-Usmaniyya, the red anemones on the scholars of the Ottoman Empire, which is in which, following the genre of biographical dictionary works, he lists the religious scholars of the Ottoman era through his time. Another important work of Tashkubrizadeh is Miftah as-Saada, which outlines the various fields of Islamic knowledge. Additionally, Tashkubrizadeh was a prolific scholar who published various treatises and texts in the fields of logic, Arabic language, history, philosophy, and theology. His prominence as a scholar provides an understanding of Islamic religious thought in the Ottoman period. So let's situate Tashkubrizadeh's writings in the broader field of Islamic philosophical ethics, because Islamic ethics could be derived from different sources, from fiqh, especially the Qawaid al-Fiqhiyya, from Tasawwuf, Sufism, and the third category in which Islamic ethics is derived is philosophy, the philosophy of Islamic ethics. So, as previously mentioned, Islamic philosophical ethics owes much of its foundations to the ethical treatise of Miskawayh, known as Tahdhib al-Akhlaq, in which he incorporated elements of Aristotelian ethical works into a format that aligned with Muslim ideals of ethical behavior derived from Muslim scripture and prophetic practice. Nasiruddin at-Tusi followed Miskawayh in composing his writings on ethics based upon Miskawayh's philosophical model. Thus, the Nasirian ethics was heavily influenced by the ethics of Miskawayh, and like Miskawayh, utilized several concepts derived from the Nicomachean ethics of Aristotle. Numerous texts on ethics that emerged after at-Tusi either directly or indirectly relied on at-Tusi's Nasirian ethics in their own writings. As previously mentioned, Al-Iji's Akhlaq al-Adudiyya was such a text that restructured Tusi's ethics into a brief, newly abridged format that gave it flexibility in usage. Its brevity also provided its interpreters, such as Tashkubrizadeh, a significant amount of latitude to make their own distinctive contributions based upon their own understanding of ethics and virtues. Al-Iji composed his writings at a time which has been termed as a period of simultaneous confessional ambiguity and confessional polarization between Sunnis and Shi'is during the Ilkhanid era. Unlike the Abbasids, the Ilkhanids, whose sovereigns initially converted to Sunni Islam, proved under the rule of Ghazan Khan to be highly sympathetic with protecting the interests of the descendants of the family of the Prophet, the Ahlul Bayt. Ghazan Khan reversed much of the practices of hostility towards the Ahlul Bayt by many of the Abbasid rulers who were threatened by the potential power that the descendants of the Prophet possessed in challenging the validity of their claims to power based on the proximity of the Abbasid lineage to that of the Prophet. Among Ghazan Khan's innovations was to build Dar as-Siyadat, or the House of Sayyids, in the major cities of the Ilkhanid state that would parallel other established institutions such as madrasas and Sufi zawiyas. These actions would have been regarded as reconciliatory acts that would have likely facilitated exchanges between Sunni and Shia scholars at the time. This confessional ambiguity prevalent during the Ilkhanid period facilitated the overlapping influence of at-Tusi's writings to both Sunni and Shia scholars of the region, which included Adud ad-Din al-Iji. Al-Iji, who lived through this era, would have also encountered the confessional polarization that was prevalent during Ul-Jaytu's reign between Sunnis and Shi'is. Al-Iji, through his many writings that became foundational to later Sunni theologians through the Ottoman era of scholarship, used the method of the late Ash'aris, the Mutaakhirin, based in rational discourse rather than polemics to engage issues of both convergence and divergence between Sunni and Shi'i thinkers. Adud ad-Din al-Iji was a key figure in the Sunni Kalam tradition, which after Fakhr ad-Din al-Razi combined aspects of Avicennan philosophy and the post-classical Ash'ari theology into a new school known as the Mutaakhirin, or late Ash'ari theological school. His two most famed students, Taftazani and Jurjani, later ensured the continuation of the school through writing lengthy commentaries on Al-Iji's texts, which were followed by further commentaries. This school of rationalist Sunni theology became established in Tashkent-Rizade's Ottoman lands as immigrant scholars from Ilkhanid and Timurid era learning centers found new support in Ottoman madrasas. Abdurrahman Atjil writes, during the early 15th century, scholars from Iran, such as Burhanuddin Haidar Haravi, who studied under Sa'd-ad-Din Taftazani, as well as Sayyid Ali Ajami and Fakhruddin Ajami, who both were trained by Sayyid Sharif Jurjani, agreed to teach in the Ottoman madrasas. Sirajuddin Halabi, who had been forced to leave Samarkand by Timur, left Transoxiana for Ottoman lands. Murad II appointed him to his newly built madrasa, which later became known as Halabi Madrasa after his teacher. During the 15th century, the presence of both immigrant scholars and those who had been educated in the more developed learning centers seems to have raised the level of learning in Anatolia and Ottoman lands in general. While the shift in scholastic centers from the Ilkhanid to the Ottoman era is clearly prevalent in the genealogy of Sunni philosophical kalam, which appears during this era, it appears that there is also an element of adherence to these intellectual genealogies in the way texts of philosophical ethics were composed. In other words, while the ambiguity during the Ilkhanid period allowed for exchanges between Shi'i ethical works like Tusi's to be utilized by Sunni scholars such as Al-Iji, there appears to be a simultaneous attempt for later scholars to give preference to an intellectual lineage of Sunni scholars by choosing to write commentaries on the shorter work of Al-Iji, for example, rather than the Nasirian ethics of At-Tusi. It is difficult to ascertain whether this was an attitude of what was either a polarization or a more friendly form of rivalry among Sunni and Shi'i philosophers that evolved in the years which followed another important philosophical and theological work of At-Tusi known as the Tajrid al-Aqaid, the distillation of principles. Later Ash'ari scholars who engaged Avicennan philosophy in their new Sunni philosophical theology, Kalam, and Shi'i scholars used the Tajrid al-Aqaid of At-Tusi as a platform of debate and dialogue between what eventually formed the Sunni, Ottoman, and Shi'i Safavid schools of philosophy. Hence, it appears that ethics that also incorporated philosophy evolved after the 13th century along similar streams of Sunni and Shi'i schools of philosophy which emerged in the centuries after Nasiruddin at-Tusi. This is evident in examining the way in which various Sunni scholars selectively rely upon the major Sunni scholar Al-Iji to write commentaries on philosophical ethics rather than at-Tusi. This tendency to not rely on at-Tusi without an intermediary Sunni scholar seems to be established more firmly in the Ottoman era. While there are certainly exceptions, such as the ethical treatise of Jalaluddin Davani, though not Ottoman, it appears that the exclusively Sunni interpreters of Al-Iji's akhlaq are doing so with preference to their own intellectual lineage of Sunni philosophical theologians. Commentaries on Al-Iji's ethics, which precede that of Tashkaprizadeh, are by the following writers: Shamsuddin Kermani, Saifuddin Ahmed al-Abhari, and Alauddin al-Khazaruni. Additionally, the Ottoman scholar Munajjim Bashi Darvishdeh, who writes much later than Tashkaprizadeh, has what is by far the lengthiest commentary on the ethics of Al-Iji that incorporates some elements of Tashkaprizadeh's commentary while making significant new contributions. I want to wrap this up a bit. Let's skip this. Other writings that predate Tashkaprizadeh's ethical treatise include Akhlaq al-Jamali by Jamaluddin Aksarai, Akhlaqi Muhsini by Hussein Kashifi, and Akhlaqi Mansuri by Ghiyasuddin Mansur ibn Sadruddin al-Shirazi. Kanalazadeh Ahmed Effendi is a contemporary of Tashkaprizadeh who also composes another famous work on Muslim philosophical ethics in Ottoman Turkish known as Akhlaqi Ala'i. One shared aspect of all of these ethical works is that they are composed in either Persian or Ottoman Turkish. Now, here is where Aduddin al-Iji's akhlaq differs. While Persian was easily understood as it was a court language even among Turkic rulers, al-Akhlaq al-Adudiyya and its commentaries distinguish themselves by being in the Arabic language. This distinction is significant in that by presenting Islamic moral philosophy in the language of learning, Al-Akhlaq al-Adudiyya reorients the primary readership of Muslim philosophical ethics from circles of court elites who may have read philosophical ethics as literature to the mainstream religious audiences for whom Arabic is the language of learning. As already mentioned, the conciseness of Al-Akhlaq al-Adudiyya gives it a flexibility that allows it to be used in madrasa networks, many of which were mobile during the Al-Khanid era. Finally, the short structure of Al-Iji's ethics allows for an extensive amount of autonomy in the way the commentaries of the text find meaning in Muslim philosophical ethics. This is evident in the richness of Tashkaprizadeh's extensive commentary that is approximately 10 times the original text of Aduddin al-Iji. So in a few minutes, let's look at the contents of the text itself. So I gave you all a brief introduction of al-Iji. So the division of the text, or the metan of the text, is divided into 4 parts. The first is theoretical. The second is practical application of ethics. And the third is advice for family relations. And the fourth is advice for political leadership. And he begins with the question, can character change? And what is the evidence for this? And we know that this is something that you find in ancient philosophy, in Aristotle. But look at how he Islamicizes this. So he argues, yes, character can change, and we have 3 sources of evidence for this. The first is experiential. Children with bad manners transform when they go to school and are taught manners. And then he quotes Imam Ali saying, the hearts of youth resemble an empty field. Whatever is planted in it springs forth. Therefore, gain adab before the heart becomes hard and becomes busy with other matters. And then he brings in a hadith. Everybody is born upon fitra, then his parents make him a Jew, Christian, or Magian. Then he brings in scriptural evidence. Lying, backbiting, slandering, etc. are prohibited in Islamic law. Had these been traits that cannot be changed, the Quran would not command people to stay away from these. The Quran also promises that God does not burden people with what they can't handle. Then he gives you a logical proof, and this is people choose to send their children to a special school, or they send them to a tutor that they think will will influence their children in a positive way. But do you see how he takes this concept that's been discussed from before Islam, and he uses completely new evidence and reframes it from an Islamic perspective. He argues, as does Aristotle, that there are three faculties of the human soul: rationality, anger, and desire. He says that humans share 2 and 3 with animals, but one is unique to human beings. The first faculty, rationality, when it's in the moderate state, it yields wisdom. If you have excess of rationality, it yields sneakiness or deceitfulness. So somebody is using their mind, they're using their brain to find out how they can outsmart others or trick others. A deficiency in rationality yields to stupidity or ghabawa. And then the discussion, he gives you verses from the Quran, he gives you he gives you examples from hadith, and he quotes a lot of sources from the sayings of Imam Ali here as well. The next is anger, ghadab. Its moderate state is courage, its excess is recklessness, and its deficiency is cowardice. So I'm out of time to wrap it up. Okay, all right. So, all right. So he gives you verses from the Quran again. Let's see if I can. The third is shahwa, desire. So its moderation is temperance. Iffa, its excess is debauchery or fujur. So this is excessive indulgence in sensual pleasures, and its deficiency is apathy or jumud. And he defines iffa again, for example, he reframes this whole discussion in an Islamic framework. So he defines it saying, iffa is using desires in their right place without becoming a slave to them in order that one is free. So you see how this idea of hurriya is used from the concept of freedom in Sufism. If you look at Qushayri and you see that section on hurriya. And then he gives you a verse from the Quran, وَلَا تَتَّبِعُ الْهَوَىٰ فَيُضِلَّكَ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. Do not follow your desires, as they will cause you to stray from the path of God. And then he quotes Ali, Sayyidina Ali, حِلْيَةُ الْمُؤْمِنِ التَّوَاضُعُ وَجَمَالُهُ التَّعَفُّفُ. This trait of the believer is humility, and his ornament, which he is beautified with, is self-restraint. So he does this for each of these things. These ideas are completely taken by these Muslim philosophers and redefined in the context of Islamic thought. So anyway, there's a whole, I've written an article on this, so I'm out of time, but I've written an article on this. You could look it up on academia.edu, where I highlight this. I've also translated the Akhlaq al-Adudiyya in another work. It's all on my academia page. You can find all of that if you're interested.